Welcome to Chapter 9, where we'll explore flight manuals and other essential documents that every pilot must understand. This chapter covers the airplane flight manual, the pilot's operating handbook, and the critical paperwork required for legal and safe flight operations. As a pilot, your ability to locate, interpret, and apply information from these documents is not just a regulatory requirement, it's a fundamental safety skill. Whether you're conducting a pre-flight inspection, planning a cross-country flight, or managing an abnormal situation in the cockpit, these documents are your primary reference. By the end of this chapter, you'll have a thorough understanding of how these materials are organized, what they contain, and how to use them effectively in real-world flying scenarios. Let's get started. Every aircraft comes with a set of required documents and manuals, and as a pilot, you are expected to know them inside and out. Familiarity with these materials isn't just a regulatory requirement, it's a fundamental part of operating safely and making sound decisions before and during flight. In this chapter, we'll cover 4 key areas. First, we'll look at flight manuals, including the airplane flight manual, the pilot's operating handbook, and owner and information manuals. What makes each one unique and when each applies? From there, we'll walk through the 9 standardized sections found in an AFM or POH, which cover everything from aircraft limitations and emergency procedures to performance data. We'll then examine the documents that must be on board your aircraft at all times, including the registration and airworthiness certificate. Finally, we'll address required inspection intervals, airworthiness directives, and the rules governing inoperative equipment. By the end of this chapter, you'll have a solid understanding of how to locate critical information and ensure your aircraft is legally and safely airworthy. The Airplane Flight Manual, or AFM, is a manufacturer-developed document that carries FAA approval. It is specific not just to the make and model of an aircraft, but to a particular serial number. Under 14 CFR Part 91, pilots are required to comply with the operating procedures and limitations outlined in the AFM. This is not optional guidance, it is a regulatory requirement. For most light aircraft manufactured after 1975, the pilot's operating handbook, or POH, serves as the FAA-approved flight manual. The POH contains all of the AFM information, and its title page will clearly identify which sections carry FAA approval. That distinction matters when you need to reference authoritative performance data or operating limitations. You may also encounter an owner's manual or information manual for certain aircraft. It is essential to understand that these documents are for general reference only. They are not FAA approved, they are not aircraft specific, and they are not required to be kept current. They cannot substitute for the AFM or POH under any circumstances. Finally, to bring consistency across the industry, the General Aviation Manufacturers Association established GAMA Specification Number 1, which created a standardized 9-section format used across all general aviation AFMs and POHs. This standardization makes it easier for pilots to locate critical information quickly, regardless of the aircraft they are flying. The AFM and POH are divided into 9 standardized sections, and knowing what lives in each one is essential for finding critical information quickly, especially under pressure. Section 1, General, gives you foundational knowledge about the aircraft, its dimensions, power plant description, and the definitions and abbreviations used throughout the rest of the manual. Think of it as your reference dictionary. Section 2 covers limitations. This is arguably the most important section. It defines the boundaries you must never exceed, including airspeed limits, power plant operating ranges, weight and loading restrictions, and required placards. Section 3 addresses emergency procedures. These are your checklists for engine failures, fires, and system malfunctions. In an actual emergency, you need to know this section cold. Section 4 covers normal procedures, everything from pre-flight inspection through post-flight, including amplified procedures that explain the reasoning behind each step. Section 5 is performance. This is where you find your takeoff and landing distance charts, climb performance data, cruise tables, stall speeds, and true airspeed conversions. Sections 6 through 9 round out the manual with weight and balance, systems descriptions, handling and maintenance information, and supplements for optional or additional equipment. Familiarize yourself with the layout of your specific aircraft's manual so you can navigate it efficiently when it matters most. The airspeed indicator uses a standardized color coding system that you must know by memory because in flight, you need to interpret these markings instantly without hesitation. The red line marks VNE, the never exceed speed. Operating above this speed risks structural damage or failure, so treat it as an absolute limit under any conditions. The yellow arc spans from VNO to VNE. This is the caution range, where you may only operate in smooth air. If you encounter turbulence while in the yellow arc, reduce power and slow below VNO as smoothly as possible. The green arc represents your normal operating range from VS1, the stall speed in a clean configuration, up to VNO, the maximum structural cruising speed. This is where you'll spend most of your flight time. The white arc covers the flap operating range from VS0, the stall speed in landing configuration, up to VFE, the maximum flap extended speed. Extending flaps above VFE risks structural damage to the flap system. For multi-engine aircraft, there are two additional markings. The red radial indicates VMC, the minimum controllable airspeed with one engine inoperative. The blue radial marks VYSE, your best rate of climb speed on a single engine, commonly called blue line. Staying at or above blue line is critical for climb performance during single-engine operations. Section 6 of the Pilot's Operating Handbook dedicates significant attention to three interconnected areas of limitations: power plant, weight and loading, and flight, and understanding each one is essential for safe, legal aircraft operation. Starting with power plant limits, this section defines the boundaries for takeoff power, maximum continuous power, and normal operating power, which corresponds to the green arc on your tachometer. It also specifies acceptable oil and fuel grades, minimum and maximum pressures, and propeller limits. Note that an RPM indicator is a required instrument on all reciprocating engine aircraft. It is not optional equipment. Weight and loading distribution covers your maximum certificated weights and the approved center of gravity range. The reference datum location is identified here as well. Keep in mind that while the limits are stated in this section, the actual weight and balance computations are performed using the methods and data found in Section 6. Flight limitations define what the aircraft is certified to do, and equally important, what it is not. This includes authorized maneuvers and their entry speeds, load factor limits, and explicitly prohibited maneuvers such as spins or acrobatic flight. Operational restrictions like flight into known icing conditions are also addressed here. Finally, placards display safety-critical information in conspicuous locations throughout the cockpit. These are legally binding and are reproduced in the limitations section or referenced through applicable airworthiness directives. Sections 3, 4, and 5 of the Pilot's Operating Handbook each serve a distinct and critical purpose, and understanding how to navigate them effectively is essential to safe, competent flight operations. Section 3 covers emergency procedures. It's organized into two layers: abbreviated checklists containing immediate action items, which you must commit to memory, followed by amplified checklists that provide additional detail. These procedures address engine failure, fire, system failures, in-flight restart, and ditching. The critical discipline here is this: complete your memorized immediate action items first, then reference the full checklist to verify and continue. In a real emergency, you won't have time to read before you act. Section 4 covers normal procedures, beginning with airspeeds for normal operations, then walking through checklists from pre-flight all the way to post-flight. The Amplified Procedures section explains the reasoning behind each step. Always use approved checklists. Consistent adherence isn't just good practice, it's a hallmark of a disciplined, professional pilot. Section 5 is your performance reference. It contains charts, tables, and graphs covering takeoff, climb, cruise, landing, stall speeds, and true airspeed conversion. As a practical example, using the stall speed chart at Figure 9.6, at a weight of 2,170 pounds, in a 20-degree bank with 40 degrees of flaps, your indicated stall speed is 44 knots. Knowing how to extract and apply this data accurately is fundamental to flight planning and airspace safety. Sections 6 through 10 of the Pilot's Operating Handbook round out the comprehensive guidance every pilot needs to operate an aircraft safely and efficiently. Section 6 covers weight and balance, providing all FAA-required data, the equipment list, and sample loading problems. This is critical material, and you'll explore it in much greater depth in Chapter 10 of this course. Section 7 describes the aircraft systems at a level appropriate for the intended pilot, covering everything from the engine and fuel system to electrical and flight controls. Chapter 7 will give you a thorough breakdown of each system. Section 8 addresses handling, servicing, and maintenance. This includes manufacturer-recommended inspection intervals, what preventive maintenance pilots are authorized to perform themselves, and proper ground handling procedures like tie-down and hangaring. Section 9 contains supplements for optional or additional equipment installed on the aircraft, things like autopilots, GPS navigation systems, or air conditioning. These supplements are inserted into the POH at the time the equipment is installed, so the content will vary from aircraft to aircraft. Finally, Section 10, when included, offers safety tips covering topics like physiological factors, weather awareness, fuel conservation, and special considerations for high-altitude or cold weather operations. While optional, this section provides genuinely valuable guidance for operating safely across a variety of conditions. Before any aircraft can legally take to the skies, it must be registered with the FAA Aircraft Registry, and the Certificate of Aircraft Registration must be carried on board at all times during flight. There are several circumstances that render a registration invalid. These include the aircraft being destroyed or scrapped, a transfer of ownership, the registered owner losing United States citizenship, the aircraft being registered under foreign laws, or the submission of a written cancellation request to the FAA. If you're operating an aircraft that hasn't yet received its permanent certificate, the pink copy of AC Form 85021 serves as a temporary authorization, allowing you to legally operate the aircraft for up to 90 days. However, be aware that this temporary authorization does not permit operation outside the United States. You must have the permanent certificate in hand before flying internationally. One important distinction to understand is that the FAA does not issue certificates of ownership. Registration and ownership are not the same thing. Holding a registration certificate does not prove you own the aircraft. Additionally, when an aircraft changes hands, the responsibility falls on the previous owner to notify the FAA of that transfer. Keep this in mind when buying or selling an aircraft to ensure the registration records remain accurate and current. The Airworthiness Certificate is one of the required documents that must be on board the aircraft during any flight operation. A standard airworthiness certificate is issued by the FAA after an inspection confirms the aircraft meets the requirements of 14 CFR Part 21 and is in a condition for safe operation. This certificate applies to aircraft in the normal, utility, acrobatic, commuter, and transport categories, as well as manned-free balloons. One of the most important things to understand about this certificate is that it must be displayed inside the aircraft in a location that is clearly legible to both passengers and crew. The good news is that once issued, a standard airworthiness certificate remains valid indefinitely, but only as long as the aircraft continues to be maintained in accordance with 14 CFR Parts 21, 43, and 91, and remains on the U.S. Aircraft Registry. When reviewing the certificate, you will find several key data items including the nationality and registration marks, where the N prefix confirms U.S. registration, the manufacturer and model, the serial number matching the aircraft data plate, and the operating category. For aircraft that fall outside the standard category, such as experimental, restricted, limited, or light sport aircraft, a special airworthiness certificate is issued instead. These come with specific operating limitations, and you should contact your local Flight Standards District Office or FSDO for details. Under 14 CFR Part 91, The owner or operator holds primary responsibility for ensuring their aircraft remains in airworthy condition at all times. This is not a shared responsibility. It rests squarely with you as the owner or operator. Two inspection requirements form the foundation of general aviation maintenance compliance. The annual inspection is required every 12 calendar months for small aircraft operated for business or personal use. This inspection must be performed by an airframe and power plant mechanic who also holds an inspection authorization, commonly referred to as an IA. The 100-hour inspection applies to aircraft under 12,500 pounds that are used to carry passengers for hire or provide flight instruction for hire. One important flexibility here: the 100-hour limit may be exceeded by up to 10 hours, but only when necessary to fly the aircraft to a maintenance facility. Any hours flown beyond the limit count toward the next 100-hour interval. Beyond these two primary requirements, large aircraft, turbojets, and turbopropeller multi-engine aircraft operate under separate inspection programs outlined in 14 CFR Part 43 and Part 91 Subpart E. As a practical guideline, experience in the field suggests that most aircraft benefit from some level of preventive attention every 25 hours or less, with minor maintenance needs arising at least every 100 hours. Staying ahead of the maintenance curve is always the safer and more cost-effective approach. 3 critical inspections fall outside the standard annual and 100-hour requirements, and every pilot operating under instrument flight rules needs to understand them thoroughly. First, your altimeter system. Under 14 CFR 91.411, the altimeter, encoding altimeter, and related systems must be tested and inspected within the preceding 24 calendar months. This inspection is required before conducting IFR operations in controlled airspace. If that 24-month window has lapsed, you are not legal to file and fly IFR. Second, the transponder. Under 14 CFR 91.413, your transponder must also be tested and inspected within the preceding 24 calendar months. Notably, this requirement applies regardless of airspace. Unlike the altimeter inspection, there is no IFR-only qualifier here. Third, the Emergency Locator Transmitter, or ELT. This one operates on a 12 calendar month cycle under 14 CFR 91.207. Inspectors check for proper installation, battery corrosion, control and crash sensor operation, and antenna signal integrity. The battery must be replaced if the ELT has been used for more than 1 cumulative hour, or when it reaches 50% of its useful battery life, whichever comes first. Critically, the battery expiration date must be legibly marked on the outside of the transmitter and recorded in the aircraft maintenance log. Airworthiness directives, commonly referred to as ADs, are legally mandated actions issued by the FAA under 14 CFR Part 39. They exist for one reason: to correct unsafe conditions identified in aircraft, engines, propellers, or appliances. Compliance is not optional. Unless the FAA has granted a specific exemption, you are required to comply. ADs fall into 2 categories. Category 1 is an emergency AD, which requires immediate compliance before the aircraft flies again. These are issued when an unsafe condition presents an immediate hazard to flight safety. Category 2 is a non-emergency AD, which allows compliance within a defined time frame and may include recurring actions, such as an inspection every 50 hours. All active ADs and the AD bi-weekly publication are available at no cost through the FAA's Regulatory and Guidance Library at rglfaa.gov. You should be checking this resource regularly. From a record-keeping standpoint, 14 CFR Section 91.417 is very specific about what must be documented. Your records must include the AD number, the method of compliance, the revision date, the next due date for any recurring AD, and the certificate number of the mechanic who performed the work. Incomplete records are a compliance failure in themselves, so make sure every entry is thorough and accurate. Under 14 CFR Part 91, all instruments and equipment installed on an aircraft must be operative before departure. However, The Minimum Equipment List concept provides a structured, FAA-approved framework for operating with certain items that are inoperative, but deemed non-essential for safe flight. The most widely used method for handling inoperative equipment is the deferral provision found in Section 91(d). As the pilot in command, you are responsible for determining whether the inoperative item is required by the aircraft's type design, by regulation, or by an airworthiness directive. If the item does not fall into any of those categories and the aircraft can be safely operated without it, a deferral is permitted. The item must then be deactivated or physically removed and placarded as inoperative. When an operator has requested and received an FAA-approved MEL along with a letter of authorization, use of that MEL becomes mandatory, not optional. The MEL, the LOA, the preamble, and the associated procedures document must all be carried on board during every operation. The FAA treats an approved MEL as equivalent to a supplemental type certificate, which underscores the legal weight it carries. One critical distinction to remember: maintenance deferrals are never the appropriate response to an in-flight discrepancy. If a system or component fails in flight, you must follow the procedures outlined in your AFM or POH, not the MEL deferral process. Certificated pilots have the authority to perform certain preventive maintenance tasks on aircraft they own or operate, but it's important to understand the boundaries of this privilege. This is governed by 14 CFR Part 43, Appendix A-C, and it applies to most certificated pilots. However, student pilots, sport pilots, and recreational pilots are excluded. Additionally, the aircraft must not be used in air carrier service. The types of tasks allowed are intentionally limited to simple, minor operations. These include things like changing oil, servicing landing gear, replacing spark plugs, swapping out safety belts or light bulbs, cleaning fuel and oil strainers, servicing batteries, replenishing hydraulic fluid, and updating panel-mounted navigation software databases. One critical requirement that pilots sometimes overlook is the maintenance entry. Anytime you perform preventive maintenance, you must make a proper logbook entry. That entry needs to include a description of the work performed, the date it was completed, and your name, signature, certificate number, and certificate type. This isn't optional. It's a regulatory requirement, and skipping it can have serious legal and safety implications. Proper documentation ensures the aircraft's maintenance history remains accurate and complete. When it comes to repairs and alterations, the regulations under 14 CFR Part 43, Appendix A, divide all maintenance work into two categories: major and minor. Major repairs and alterations are those that, if improperly done, could significantly affect structural strength, flight characteristics, or other airworthiness qualities. These require approval using FAA Form 337 and must be signed off by either a certificated repair station, an airframe and power plant mechanic holding an inspection authorization, or an FAA representative. Minor repairs and alterations carry less risk if performed incorrectly and can be approved by an A&P mechanic or certificated repair station through a proper maintenance record entry. No Form 337 required. When an aircraft doesn't currently meet airworthiness requirements but can still be safely operated for a specific limited purpose, a special flight permit may be issued. This is a type of special airworthiness certificate that authorizes flight under defined conditions. Common situations include flying an aircraft to a maintenance base for repairs, delivering or exporting an aircraft, evacuating from an area facing imminent danger, or operating an overweight aircraft where fuel and landing options are limited. To obtain a special flight permit, you'll work with your local Flight Standards District Office, or FSDO, or a designated airworthiness representative, commonly referred to as a DAR. As an aircraft owner or operator, you carry a set of important legal and safety responsibilities that go beyond simply flying the aircraft. Let's walk through each of them. First, you are required to keep two critical documents on board the aircraft at all times: a current airworthiness certificate and a certificate of aircraft registration. These must be present during any operation, and you should expect to produce them upon request. Second, you are responsible for maintaining airworthiness. This means complying with all applicable airworthiness directives, ensuring that all maintenance is properly documented, and correcting any defects that arise between scheduled inspections. Airworthiness is not just the mechanic's responsibility. It begins with UEWAs. Third, stay current on the regulations that govern your aircraft's operation and maintenance. Rules can change, and it is your obligation to remain informed. Finally, you must notify the FAA of certain changes under 14 CFR Part 47, Section 47.41. This includes any change to your permanent mailing address, the sale or export of the aircraft, or a loss of eligibility to hold registration. Keeping your records accurate with the FAA ensures your aircraft remains properly registered and legally operable. A simple and effective way to remember the required documents that must be on board any aircraft during operation is the acronym AROW. Let's walk through each one. The A stands for Airworthiness Certificate, which must be displayed in the aircraft and remain legible to both passengers and crew. The R stands for Registration Certificate. The official certificate of aircraft registration must be carried at all times during flight. The O stands for Operating Limitations, which are found in the Aircraft Flight Manual or Pilot's Operating Handbook and must be FAA approved and specific to that aircraft. And the W stands for Weight and Balance, current data that is specific to the aircraft's serial number, not just a generic document. One additional requirement to keep in mind: if your aircraft is operating under an approved minimum equipment list, you must also have the MEL itself, the letter of authorization, the preamble, and the associated procedures document on board. Together, AROW plus the MEL package ensures you are fully compliant before every flight. Section 9 of the AFM or POH is dedicated entirely to supplements, and understanding how to use this section is essential for any pilot operating an aircraft with optional equipment installed. Not every aircraft of the same make and model will have identical avionics or systems, so the supplements ensure that pilots have accurate, FAA-approved guidance specific to the equipment actually on board their aircraft. Supplements cover a wide range of optional systems. These can include autopilot systems, GPS, and navigation units, such as the Garmin GPS-3, terrain awareness and warning systems known as TAWS, air conditioning systems, and multifunction displays like the Avidyne MFD. Each of these systems may have specific operating procedures, limitations, or emergency checklists that differ from the base aircraft configuration. A key point to remember is that supplement information is inserted into the flight manual at the time the optional equipment is installed. This means two aircraft of the same model sitting side by side on the ramp may have completely different supplements depending on how each one is equipped. Before flying an unfamiliar aircraft, always review which supplements apply to that specific airplane and familiarize yourself with any procedures unique to its installed equipment. As we wrap up Chapter 9, let's reinforce the core principles that every pilot needs to carry forward. First, know your manual. The AFM or POH is an FAA-approved, legally binding document specific to your aircraft. The owner's manual simply does not carry the same authority. Second, never depart without your AROW documents on board: airworthiness certificate, registration, operating limitations, and weight and balance data. These are required by regulation, not just best practice. Third, stay current on inspections and airworthiness directives. Annual 100-hour altimeter, transponder, and ELT inspections all have mandatory intervals, and AD compliance is never optional. Fourth, handle inoperative equipment correctly. Use the Section 91.213D deferral process or an approved MEL, always placard the item, and never attempt to defer a discrepancy that occurs in flight. Use your AFM or POH procedures instead. Finally, understand the scope of your maintenance privileges as a certificated pilot. You may perform limited preventive maintenance under Part 43, but always make a proper logbook entry. Every one of these requirements exists for the same reason: to support a safe flight. Your aircraft documentation is not paperwork. It is a critical tool in your safety toolkit.